Now in its third year, it's a Yank on the Footy with Craig Wessels, talking about the greatest game on the face of the earth. Sit back and enjoy, everybody. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 149 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels, coming to you from Sandusky, Ohio, and thanks for giving this episode a listen. I really think you're going to love this discussion, even if you are not a Bulldogs supporter. There are some fantastic stories coming up here. In this 2022 preview episode, I am sitting down to preview the Bulldogs, as I'd mentioned, with a gentleman who has been following the Bulldogs longer than I've been alive, and some people call me old. Steven Campbell is a very knowledgeable Bulldog supporter, but his stories that we discussed in our talk are going to make you want to pour yourself a cup of your favorite beverage, grab a snack, and enjoy everything that he has to share. Now, don't forget that you can find everything related to the podcast over at my website, yankonthefooty.com. You can get on the mailing list, which I hope you do. You can leave me a review. If you're enjoying the show, there's a spot there where you can leave a review up at the top, and I can share those out on social media. A huge help to encourage people to tune into the podcast. I do hope you'll consider doing that. You can leave me a voicemail there as well. And with the mailing list, when I do live episodes, I send those out 24 hours in advance to let people know that I'm going to be going live. So hopefully you'll consider doing that. And if you're enjoying the show and you want to help out the podcast, you might want to consider clicking on that little button in the bottom left-hand corner, which takes you to my Buy Me a Coffee page. If you want to help keep the podcast up and running and help to defray some of the cost, that'd be greatly appreciated. You don't have to, of course, but I certainly would not hate it if it happened. But again, thanks so very much. And if you're interested in any podcast gear, including the new logo that I just posted over on my Redbubble page, click on the store button up at the top, and you can go ahead and sign up to get something from there as well. And I do hope that you enjoy my chat with Steven Campbell. This was an absolute treat. We went down so many different avenues and directions, and just the names that were dropped in this conversation were just jaw-dropping. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my guest for our Western Bulldogs preview is someone whose life experiences have to be some of the most interesting of anyone I've had the chance to speak with before. We've been chatting for about a half an hour before I've hit the record button, and it's the stories that we're going to be hearing here are absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to share these with you. He has attended two of the three most recent Bulldogs grand final appearances, and no, he did not sneak into Western Australia last year to go to Optus. I am honored to be joined by longtime Bulldog supporter Steven Campbell. Steven, thanks for coming on today, sir.
You're very welcome, Craig. It's my pleasure to join you for this podcast.
This is, I'm so glad you reached out. We've been trading emails, and I actually found out that the WhatsApp works across 16 time zones as well, although 15 sure after this weekend, because we set our clocks ahead an hour on Sunday. So it's great to talk with you, and I can't wait to share your stories. I almost feel like a podcasting version of a kid on Christmas morning, and I've just come down the stairs and looking under the tree going, what do I open first? Because there's so many stories that I want to get into with you here that I don't know where to begin, but we're gonna start at the beginning of this. And you are not originally from Australia. You emigrated from somewhere else, and it took you a significantly long period of time to carve through the language barrier, I'm sure.
Well, I was very young at the time, Craig. My family migrated by boat in 1951. And to just fill in a little bit of the historical background, World War II ended in 1945, of course. My father got demobbed. He was he was in the Royal Engineers, diffusing bombs all over the south of England. There was mum and dad and us four kids. So I was born, two of my older siblings were born during the war. My sister Maggie was born on April the 20th, 1940, which was Hitler's birthday. And my brother Peter, my late brother Peter, was born about 3 years later in May. So two children born during the war. My sister Pauline born just when the war closed, in December 1945, and I was born in December 48. So we migrated in 51 aboard an ex-troop ship, the SS Cheshire, and we were 10-pound Poms. It cost my father 10 English pounds for the passage to Australia for himself, my mother, and the 4 children. So we left Liverpool on the Cheshire and sailed around the Bay of Biscay into the Mediterranean, then to Suez and Port Said, and called in at Aden at the end of the Red Sea, which was now in modern day Yemen, and then we crossed the Indian Ocean. And when we crossed the Indian Ocean, I actually got meningitis, viral meningitis, and I nearly died.
Wow.
My father was a Catholic. My mother was Church of England, but neither of them were churchgoers. But I had never been baptized. So they thought I was going to die, and so the ship's chaplain baptized me at sea. And I still have the baptismal certificate. It was registered at St Mary's Church in Port Melbourne when the ship docked in Melbourne.
Okay.
I've got the baptismal certificate, and I survived. However, the doctor that saved my life when we were crossing the Indian Ocean between Aden and Colombo, he was later found out by Captain Potter to have been getting into the ship's stores of morphine because he was a morphine addict.
Oh, wow.
And he got put off the boat in Colombo. But, he saved my life. So that's the beginning of my life in Australia. I was about 2.5 years old when we landed in Melbourne. And, that's the best decision my father and my mother ever made, was to leave Europe, leave England, and come out and start a new life in Australia. And I will always be grateful to them for having the courage to do that.
Now I'm gonna kind of fly in the face of of a lot of the things that are talked about in terms of job sharing and that sort of thing in the present day. But I'm going to ask the question of the 1950s. What career did your father have once he came here to Australia?
Well, the old man always used to say he was a jack of all trades and master of none.
Okay.
He was born in South Shields in the north of England. His father was a professor of music, and his brother was a very, very talented musician and was a band leader in London in the 1930s, had his own band, and he later on he became the musical director at the Theatre Royal in Dublin. However, he was quite well off because he was in show business, and there was a lot of massive unemployment in the north of England. And my Uncle Jimmy invited Dad to come down because he could get him a job in London as a commissionaire or a doorman at the cinema, at Gorman British Cinemas. So Dad came down to London in about 1931, and that's where he met my mother. She was an usher at the cinema, and so they married in 1934. After marriage, Dad got a job as a boiler attendant at a big hospital in London at a place called Barking. But I think it was a hospital in London. He also worked at the Barking Side Power Station, attending boilers there, and then he was drafted into the army and spent the Second World War in the army. And after that, he went back to being a boiler attendant, and then he was recruited by the Victorian Railways as Australia had received a great scare during World War II, and the government adopted on a mass migration policy. They actually said that Australia had to populate or perish, and so they began bringing out just literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of displaced people from Europe. As you know, there was a massive dislocation, and so many people were brought out from Europe in that time, and they recruited the railways recruited workers, and we we had a house to live in that was, they were actually prefabricated houses that bought out, and there was a railway estate in this area in Braybrook, and we lived there. And Dad spent the next probably 20 odd years working for the railways as a fitter's assistant.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah, that's the short story of.
It's interesting, and this, I'm going to mention this now, and those of you who are listening will, I think, be able to confirm this statement after we've finished up our conversation today. But I think it's rather interesting that your parents met in a movie theater.
Yeah.
Because what we're about to talk about with regards to your life, in many ways, could be a movie. So I just think that's really an interesting connection there, that you are the product, and you said that your dad was a jack of all trades, master of none. I'm going to argue that he mastered one thing very well, and that was diffusing bombs.
Yeah, well,
because
if
he was lousy at that job, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation.
That's true. Actually, the BBC produced a series called Danger UXB, and it was based on the diaries of my father's commanding officer, Major Hartley. He kept these scrupulously kept these diaries during the war, and somehow the BBC got hold of them and used those to put together this series, Danger UXB. It was black and white television, probably shown in Australia in the 1960s.
Okay.
Late 1960s, I believe, yeah. But
wow.
That's one thing he mastered for sure.
Yeah, that
he also used to tell a really good story about his time in the army. The old man was a professional boxer when he was very young, 17, 18, 19, in the north of England. And when he joined the army, they had a boxing championship. And even though he was a bit older than most of the other recruits, he was in his 30s. He was about 35, 36. He won the regimental championship, and for his prize was 500 cigarettes. And
was he a smoker?
Yeah, he was. And when the CO gave him his prize, he said to him, "Well done, Sapper. I think you fought before."
Yes, well,
yeah.
and I know that term sapper because that term gets used for the engineers in the Army here in the U.S. as well. That's a much more universal term there. Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
So, we're going to get talking about your fascination with motorcycles and traveling here in just a moment. But you mentioned this, and I wanted to ask you this question. And how in the heck did Ted Whitten end up at your house when you were a kid?
Yeah, this is a good story. Ted Whitten, who, you're sure I'm biased. I mean, he played for the Bulldogs. He was absolutely the biggest personality the game has ever seen. There is no doubt about it. How do you explain a guy who captain coached a team that had virtually zero success from, won the premiership in 54, made the finals in 56, never appeared again until 1961, made a grand final in 61, and then never, ever had another finals experience, finals game until Ted Whitten retired in 1970. So he was not from a big team, a big successful team, but he was Mr. Football. His personality was so big. He was such a great player. He was universally loved by Bulldog supporters, absolutely. He was respected by all the other clubs too, not loved but respected, but he was acknowledged as the best player in the competition. So he came to our house in the following way. He never had a profession. He never had a trade. So he did a lot of different things in his working life outside football. And one of the things he did, he started a driving school. And when my brother was 18 and went for his driving license, Ted Whitten took him for his driving license.
Okay.
And, of course, he passed his license first up. And when they got back to the house in the car, my brother said to Ted, do you want to come in and meet my mum and my young brother? My young brother would love to meet you. And so, he came in, he sat down at the kitchen table, had a cup of tea, some fruitcake, and it was just like talking to a bloke that he had no airs and graces. He was just a great human being like that. Wow. And he was universally recognised for being like that.
Uh-huh.
He would talk to anyone. He treated people, no matter who you were, he treated people with respect and decency. He was a wonderful human being. So, he came to our house. I got his autograph. And, he spent half an hour chatting to us, and just a great guy. I was about 12 years old when I met him.
Wow. And that's and that's one of the things, and again, the game was a lot different when you were 12 years old than it is today. But I still make the argument that footy and the relationship between the fans, between the supporters and the clubs when COVID is not around is unlike anything that we have here in the United States. Now, during baseball spring training, the relationship between the fans and the players is a lot different than it is during the grind of playing 162 games over the course of 7 months. Yes, they'll sign autographs here and there, but the love affair that looks like is going on between the supporters and the clubs is just amazing. It's just it's great to see, and it's one of the things that I really, really love about this game. And it's kind of hard to sit here 16 time zones away and go, I really like that, even though I'm not there, but hope to be someday to get to see it in person.
Yeah, well, football in Australia now has become a very professional game compared to what it was back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But even now, I can go down to the Western Bulldogs Football Club any day of the week. I can go into Barker's Cafe at lunchtime, and there'll be players in there having their lunch, and you can go up and have a chat to them. So they're still very approachable like that. There isn't this barrier put between the players and the public and the supporters. Right. So it's still very good like that.
Yeah, and that's and I've made that argument, and those of you who listen to the podcast regularly have heard this before. But as I've said, and I don't begrudge anybody making as much money as they can at their job. Get every penny that you can. I have no problem with that at all. I'm big on capitalism, but the athletes in most of the professional sports here in the U.S., they the salary structure has put them in a different orbit than the fans. As I've said, you might run into a Bulldogs player at the coffee shop in the morning, but you're not going to find you're not going to run into LeBron James at the local grocery store picking up a gallon of milk because his wife forgot to get milk at the grocery or something like that. That's never going to happen.
Yeah. That point you made about them being in another orbit, I do remember reading an article in a magazine that I used to subscribe to a few years ago called Inside Indonesia. And it was an article about the conditions of Nike workers in factories in Indonesia. And at the time, Michael Johnson's sponsorship from Nike was, I think it was about $6 million a year. And it was greater than the wages bill for the Indonesian workforce of Nike. That's the comparison. One man was earning as much as thousands of Indonesian workers in Nike factories. So, another orbit, definitely. Another orbit.
That's a great point. So you mentioned that when you were younger, you do not remember the 1954 grand final, but your family must have something that they talk about or that they have talked about for a lifetime about it.
Well, no, not at all.
Oh,
What
okay.
happened with this? This is really, this is quite interesting. In 1954, when the Bulldogs made the grand final, their first ever appearance in the grand final, they'd been in the competition for 30 years, having been brought in 1924 with North Melbourne and Hawthorn. So it took 30 years for the Bulldogs to make a grand final. And a couple of years before that, we arrived in Australia in 1951. The Queen had, got married only a couple of years before. She made a royal visit to Australia, and I think it might have been about 52 or 53.
Okay.
And in 54, my mother went into Footscray on the bus from where we lived in Braybrook, just about a 25-minute bus ride, and she could see all this red, white, and blue bunting all up and down the main street in Footscray, and flags, red, white, and blue everywhere. And she thought, I must have missed the news. The Queen must be coming for another royal visit. And of course, because my parents didn't follow AFL. My old man was a mad keen Newcastle United supporter from the English Football League. And Newcastle United had their golden years in the early 1950s. They won the FA Cup 3 times in 5 years. So my dad was a mad keen soccer supporter. Mm-hmm. My mother wasn't really interested in sport. So I actually got involved in AFL or VFL through my brother was a Bulldog supporter. But the thing that really got me involved was the club, the Footscray Football Club, used to give out premiership tickets, seasons tickets to the schools in the area, so you could go to the football. It didn't cost you anything. They gave you a ticket to get in. So that's how I got in to see my first games for the Bulldogs back in 1956.
Okay.
And my brother was a supporter. My sisters weren't interested in football too much. My brother was a supporter, and he got me a ticket to go and see the 61 grand final. Mm-hmm. He got what a scalper is, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, so I remember going with my brother to the MCG to see the Bulldogs play Hawthorn, and he bought tickets from a scalper, and I got to see the game in standing room. There was my brother, his girlfriend at the time, and a guy called Philip Cook, a mate of his, and me. And I stood, in those days, Victoria Bitter was sold in big 26 fluid ounce cans, tin cans, not these aluminium things that you could, crush between 2 fingers.
Right.
These were solid tin cans. And because I was only 12 years old, not too tall, and we're in standing room, I stood on top of the beer cans to get a better view.
That's in order to get to see in. I was hoping you were going to tell me that you went through a couple of those cans yourself during the game.
No, I reserved that for later on when I was over 18. I could tell a few stories about that too.
I don't want to mention this, but I'm going to go ahead and toss it out there. I don't know if you realize that the 1961 grand final and the 2021 grand final, the Bulldogs had an 8-point lead at halftime in both of those games.
I didn't I knew we led at halftime in 61. I didn't know that it was 8 points.
Yes.
I didn't know it was 8 points.
8 points in both games, yes.
Yeah. That 1961 grand final was, probably as big a surprise to many Bulldog supporters as to, all of the supporters in the league, because we didn't have a very strong side, and we made the grand final unexpectedly. The game that got us into the grand final, I was there. I was only a kid. I must have been 12, right?
Yeah.
The last game of the year, we had to defeat Geelong to get into the 4.
Of course you did.
Geelong were 4th and we were 5th. And whoever won took up the 4th position. The game was at the Western Oval. And I remember this game absolutely with great clarity, because Ted Whitten kicked the two longest drop kick goals I have ever seen in the second quarter. We won the game by about 20 points.
Mm-hmm.
And after the game, I went with my mate Arthur Milligan. We actually got into the rooms after the game. The rooms were packed with supporters.
Yeah.
Packed with supporters. And Ted Whitten made an absolutely inspiring speech. He got up on a table and he was bollock naked. He was toweling himself down. And I still remember he said, "We're going to go all the way. Stick with us. We've made it this far. We are going to go all the way." It was a very inspiring speech. And it was great to be there amongst all the supporters. Sadly, we didn't go on to win the game.
Right.
It was a bit. We had a few injuries in the first half, and it was a very, very hot day. And Hawthorn had the week's rest, and they steamrolled us in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
It was great for Hawthorn supporters to win their first premiership. Was a great thing because they'd been down for years and years and years.
Well, when he was making that speech, it's probably a good thing that that roaming Brian Taylor was not down there to do an interview at that time, because they might not have been back on television for a while then. But
exactly.
Was that game after Ted Whitten had been at your house?
It was, because
Okay.
he came to our house, I think, in 1960 or the very beginning of 1961. But, those two drop kicks, I tell you, Lou Richards, who's someone you would have heard of. Lou Richards, a famous Collingwood captain and newspaper columnist, and he died just a few years ago. A couple of years ago. He was in his 90s, Lou Richards, and he used to write for the Herald Sun. And he was a very, very prominent figure on sports shows on Sunday morning, Channel 7's World of Sport.
Okay.
A much, much loved character. And I can remember him writing. He was prone to a bit of exaggeration. But in the Monday Morning Herald Sun, he wrote his match report and he said, "Ted Whitten defeated Geelong with two of the longest drop kicks you will ever see. The first one went 85 yards. The second one went 84 yards, 2 feet and 6 inches." So, it was – Ted was an inspiring captain, an inspiring player. Well worth having a look at any of the stuff on YouTube of his highlights. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of them, but a very great player. One thing I do remember about him, it was a famous mark that he took against North Melbourne at the Arden Street ground. There used to be, it's a great photo. It's available, the photo's on the web.
Okay.
It's a great photo because it looks like they're playing football inside an industrial complex, because in the background there's this massive gasometer that was beside the North Melbourne ground.
Okay.
And Ted Whitten's taken this mark standing on Frank Galley's shoulders, and the background is this gasometer and a couple of players looking on. It's a very, very evocative photo. But I was fortunate to see Ted play from 1956 up to 1970.
Okay, that's fascinating. So that's going to answer a question I was going to ask you later on in terms of, who were some of the greatest players you've ever witnessed playing, but that's evidently one. But let's get to your travels here, because we're going to come back and actually talk about the 2022 Bulldogs as well, because they've got a score to settle with the Demons here. So
sure.
How did you get interested in motorcycles? Because it's not something, a lot of people ride, but it's not something that most people don't ride to the extent that you do.
Well, it's very, like, I might have mentioned it before, this friend of my father's came out on a Sunbeam motorcycle and sidecar in 1954. And that was the first, he came out with his wife. This guy's, his name was Cecil Ledger. He was 57 years old. His wife was a bit younger than him, Vina. She was about 35. And he took me for a ride up I was sitting on the back of the bike, not in the sidecar. And we went up South Road to a petrol station about a mile away to get fuel. And it was a thrilling experience. The sound the speed, the wind, the smell of the hot engine when we stopped.
Mm-hmm.
It was like it was the first time I'd travelled at speed.
Uh-huh.
I might have been on a bus. We didn't have a car, so I'd never travelled in a car. It was the first time I'd been at speed, and it left an indelible impression on me. So
evidently,
yeah, absolutely.
So, you've and I'm going to put links to the websites that you shared with me here, but you have ridden motorcycles literally all over the world, and
all over Asia, not all over the world, but all over Asia.
It's and Europe too, if I'm not mistaken.
Europe,
so you've hit several continents, and who's going to come tell us that we were wrong here? Are they going to dig into your logbook and check and go, well, he didn't get South America, but tell us. I want to know about some of these experiences, and whether or not you were traveling for the sake of just getting out and traveling, or if there was an ulterior motive behind it. And I'm gonna want to get into, like, the longest distances you traveled, the other stuff that you've seen as we go along. But how did you got the bug as a young child riding the motorcycles, and when did you get your first motorcycle, and when did you decide I need to start making these long journeys?
Well, before I actually traveled by motorcycle, the first big trip I made was with four school friends. Now, I don't know what. I mean, we were just all on the same wavelengths. When we were in year 11, we decided that we were going to buy a Land Rover or some vehicle, and we were going to drive overland to Europe, to London. This is when we were about 17 years old. Now, it didn't work out exactly that way. I went and did year 12. One of my mates went out to work. The other two were doing engineering courses. And one of my friends, my best friend actually, he developed bone spurs on his heels. And another friend, he actually went over to Europe with a band that he'd been roadieing for, a band called Procession. And he went over to London with them. And when he was over there, he decided, my mate with the bone spurs, he was sick of putting up with these things, and he decided he'd go over to Europe just to get his mind off the pain that he was suffering. Mm-hmm. And he went over there, and they actually went out to Amsterdam. They bought a combi van, a 1200cc Volkswagen combi, and they drove down to Morocco. Okay. And the big plan was then hatched that they would drive the van out to India, and me and my other mate, Ken, would travel up to Darwin, get on a plane to Portuguese East Timor, and make our way overland, and we'd meet outside the General Post Office in Madras sometime later in the year. So we sort of kept in touch by mail. It was a bit different. It was a bit.
That had to be hard to do.
Yeah, it was, because they set out from Amsterdam in this combi van, and they estimated that they'd take about 3 or 4 months to reach India. And we set out from Melbourne, and we estimated, we could probably make it to Madras in 3 or 4 months. And we did. I mean, we met outside the post office in Madras I think it would have been about the middle of 1970, maybe a little bit later in the year.
Okay.
And travel around in the combi van. And, as things came to pass, I didn't really get on with one of the guy who owned the combi van. I just wasn't enjoying traveling with them anymore. Well, him in particular. So I thought it'd be best if I set off on my own, because I wanted to meet up with my sister who'd gone back to England. She'd been in London for a couple of years. She left Australia in 1961, and so she'd been in England for about 9 or 10 years. So I travelled up on my own. I left and I started travelling on public transport. I went up by train up to Bombay, then crossed over India and went into Nepal, came back into India again, up to Pakistan. And when I got to Afghanistan, I found a letter waiting for me at Poste Restante in the Kabul post office. And it was a letter from my mates. They've been trying to contact me everywhere to tell me that they'd had a serious road accident in India, and my best friend Rolly had been killed in the road accident.
Wow!
And they'd got to Bombay, and they were trying. That's where they were. When I got this letter, I decided to abandon my attempt to get to London, but I'd go back to meet up with them in Bombay, and that's what I did.
Okay.
And we had a meeting. The three of us decided, we'd make our ways separately back to Australia. And so, I got back at the end of 1970. That was my first trip, but it really whetted my appetite for travel, and that's when I decided to get a motorcycle and ride a motorcycle over to London. So I bought a motorcycle as soon as I got back to Australia, and started planning that trip with another mate of mine who was keen to join me. He bought a motorcycle in Singapore. He bought a Honda 175. I had a Honda 450 twin, and then we rode up to Thailand together. Actually, my motorbike got held up by a wharfie strike. You call them longshoremen, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
We call them wharfies. There was a wharfie strike in Melbourne, and my motorbike got held up for about 6 weeks. So it wasn't in Singapore when I arrived. It was still on a ship somewhere from Melbourne. So my mate bought a bike, and the two of us travelled up to Thailand together on his 175 Honda.
Okay.
Yeah. And, it was a great trip. We went up to Chiang Mai up in the north, and, we travelled around Thailand quite a bit. And by this stage, my motorbike had arrived in Singapore, so we made our way south again. And I remember this distinctly. We had the bright idea. We stayed at a famous traveller's haunt in Bangkok called the Tai Son Greet Hotel. And it was a very atmospheric place. It had rooms upstairs and a kitchen downstairs. And it was a 24-hour place. All the taxi drivers used to come there to get a meal at any time of the night, Okay. It was a place that was full of life. So we decided to avoid the heat of the day and the traffic, we'd travel at night. So we left at midnight. Now, I didn't even have a helmet, right? I was wearing a sarong on my head like it was a turban, And my mate didn't have a full face helmet or a visor. He had this open face helmet. And after about an hour or two of riding, the insects at night, it was a very balmy evening, the insects at night were giving him hell. So he decided to put on his sunglasses. So he's wearing sunglasses at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And, of course, the inevitable happened. We came to a point where the road was sort of like up on an embankment between rice fields, and they'd been putting a big irrigation pipe under the road. So half of the road had been dug up.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
there was no signage or anything like that.
Man.
And in front of the hole, there was a pile of screenings probably about 1.5 meters high, and there was a flimsy wooden barrier before that. And all I can remember, because I'm sitting on the back and I'm sort of dozing off, my head's resting on his back, and I just heard him yell out, "Oh, shit," like that. And next minute, we go up like Evel Knievel over this bloody ramp of screen, through the barrier, over the screenings, and then the next thing, I'm on the deck. And luckily, I landed with my right arm in against my rib cage, and I landed on the point of my shoulder and my elbow and my right hip. And I was badly shaken up. You just had the wind just knocked out of you, and the motorbike was still going, the engine was still going. It smelled petrol, and my mate was calling out to me. He couldn't see; his face was all cut up, and I sort of managed to get to my feet. I was a bit worried. I managed to roll over on my left side, get up, hit the kill button on the motorbike, and go and see him. And he was bleeding profusely from cuts on his forehead. Blood was all in his eyes. We sort of cleaned him up a bit. And then we had to decide what we were going to do. Well, there was no traffic around. It was maybe 1:00 in the morning. And unfortunately, in the accident, the back brake pedal had bent. And so when I got on the front of the bike to ride it, and when my mate got on the back, the swing arm came down and it locked on the back brake. So we couldn't ride two up. So, we had to stop someone. So we had a Thai dictionary with us, and we looked up the word for hospital, and a couple of cars stopped, but they took one look at us, and I don't know whether people were superstitious or just didn't want to get involved, or the sight of blood upset them, but they took off. But the third vehicle that came along was a truck, and it had two guys in it, and there was a young girl about 18, and the guys didn't want to take us, but the girl was really feisty, and she stood up to him and she said, no, because all we could say was hospital. And they took my mate in the truck, and I followed them in on the back of the hospital, I followed them in on the motorbike, because I could ride it if I sat well up near the tank.
Okay.
And we got into hospital, and they stitched my mate up. He had 27 stitches in his face. They x-rayed me. And I was in the hospital for about 5 or 6 days because I could hardly walk, and I had really great difficulty. They x-rayed me and so on. There was nothing broken, but I was just severely bruised, and I could hardly raise my right arm at all. It took about before after about 5 days I could get my arm up to horizontal, and then we decided, look, we really need to get going again. I think I'm going to be okay. So we got on the motorbike and continued the trip. But the people in the hospital were absolutely wonderful to us. They wouldn't accept any payment for our time there. They were just superb, They were just great people. So yeah, that was the start of the trip. So it didn't start too well, but it ended, and it didn't end too well either.
You've made quite a few trips over the years. You said that you had one trip that you actually did finally get from Singapore to London.
Yeah, that was the trip. That was the trip.
So this one you made it to London then. So both of you on just one bike though.
No. My bike arrived. My bike that I'd bought in Melbourne, we put it in a crate.
Okay.
And eventually, after the Wharfie strike finished, it arrived in Singapore. I went down. After the accident in Thailand, we went back to Penang, which is that was where we had to catch the ferry to go over to Madras. My mate waited for me in Penang. I hitchhiked down to Singapore, picked up the bike, and what a pain that was. In those days, young travellers, there was this big sort of, I don't know, most young people in those days were opposed to the Vietnam War, and some people say that this was really a sort of a campaign orchestrated by the US government, because they didn't want anti-war sentiment being spread by young anti-war people around Southeast Asia. And certainly some of the regimes at the time were, like the regime in Singapore was very, very anti-Western, young people, long-haired people, anti-hippie, whatever, Indonesia was the same. And when I went down to pick up my motorbike, I had a telegram from another mate who was travelling at the same time, but not on a motorcycle. He was travelling with a couple of Canadian girls, and he had managed to find out that my bike had arrived in Singapore. So he sent me a telegram. I had this telegram, and he told me where he was staying. He was staying at a hotel in Bencoolen Street called the Kien Hua Hotel. And it was a hotel where, young travellers would stay. It was a cheap Chinese hotel, and that's where young travellers would stay. So I go to Singapore, and I'm trying to get in to pick up my motorbike, and immigration said, no, we're not going to let you come into Singapore. I'm saying, well, why not? I've got to pick up my motorbike. And they said, well, what proof have you got to pick up a motorbike? And I showed them the telegram. And this guy reads the telegram, and he sees that my mate says I'm staying at the Kianhua Hotel. And he said, you're hippies. Your mate's staying at a hippie hotel. You can't come into Singapore. And I had to stand there and argue with this guy and get his boss to come out and explain to his boss that I had, a bill of lading for the motorcycle.
Right.
And showed in the documents. And eventually they let me in. They gave me a visa for a week to go in and pick up the motorbike and get out of there. And that's what I did. I never, ever want to go there again.
Well,
in fact,
go ahead.
I had actually been deported from Singapore in 1970. On my way back to Australia, after my mate had been killed, I took a plane from from Calcutta over to Bangkok, and I stood in the migration queue at Bangkok airport with an American guy who had long hair, and he had it tucked up under one of those Nepali caps, right? And this Thai immigration officer asked him to take off his cap, so he did, and he's got long hair. And I'm standing next to this guy. We weren't traveling together. We just met on the plane. I don't even recall his name. I had an Indian shirt on, a white linen shirt with no collar. I was wearing jeans, and I had very short hair. I had my head shaved in Varanasi on the banks of the Ganges, and my hair had only grown about a quarter of an inch. But no, I got lumped in with this guy, and we were both put on the next plane south to Singapore that night. In Singapore, we got detained because we'd been kicked out of Thailand, and they locked us up in a room and gave us a jug of water at the airport, and they sent us back to Bangkok the next morning. They sent us back to Bangkok. And by this stage, the Thai Airways officials were getting a bit worried because they didn't want these two foreigners being flown around all over Southeast Asia at their expense. So they had people in there to talk with immigration. To cut a long story short, the American guy had to get his hair cut, which he did, and they wrote a couple of things in my passport in Thai, which I had a British passport at the time. So I took my passport to the British Embassy in Bangkok to get it translated as to what they'd written. And what they'd written over my Thai visa translated exactly like this. It said, "This subject has since changed his attire and is no longer regarded as a hippie." Can you believe? Yeah. And I've still got the passport. I've still got it.
Wow.
I've still got it.
So with all the travels that you have done, and you've documented this very well on the website that you shared, and like I said, I will have the link to this in the show notes there. Where's your favorite place that you have visited on your motorcycle?
Okay, look, there's two favorite places that I have in the world.
I know it's not Singapore.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. In fact, I used to give the Singapore government as much hell as I possibly could on the Lonely Planet Travelers website, Thorntree.
Okay.
Whenever people got on there asking questions about Singapore, I would reply in a not too flattering way. But yeah, look, my favorite places to visit. Well, number one, Indonesia, because I speak the language. My wife is Indonesian. I have a lot of friends there, and it's just a fantastic country to ride a motorcycle. I'm not talking about Bali or Java, which has got very, very heavily populated. Java's got like 140 million people living on an island that's probably about a tenth the size of Texas. So it's very crowded, and I've never ridden a motorcycle in Java, but I ride in Lombok and east of Lombok, where there's not very heavily populated. The scenery, the beaches, the mountains, volcanoes, forests are just wonderful. The people are fantastic, and the food's great. And I have such wonderful experiences there. I've climbed Mount Tambora twice on Sumbawa. I've climbed Iliapi, a volcano east of Flores. I've got a lot of good contacts there, and I just enjoy it immensely. So Indonesia, number one, and number two, India. And the reason why I pick India is because it has such a vast history going back millennia. It's got so many different languages and cultures, but over all of this, you can always find people who speak English. And it's when you can communicate with people that you can really get a feel for what's going on in a country. You don't feel like a tourist when you can talk to people who aren't involved in the tourism business.
Makes sense.
So if I go to Vietnam, I'm only going to be able to talk with people who basically are involved with tourism. Touts, people in restaurants, hotels, people organising tours and so on. You don't get to speak to the local people. Whereas in India, you can just communicate so easily with people who are not involved with tourism. They're government servants, they're school teachers, they're housewives, they're farmers, they're small business people. And look, the scenery in India is so varied. The climatic conditions are so varied. There's just a marvelous panoply and vibrancy about the place. I love the food as well. And, one of the things that I've really enjoyed following at the moment, there's a couple of young guys who've ridden motorcycles over from Sydney. They rode over from Sydney to London in 2019 and got there before Corona broke out. And they've got a vlog on YouTube called North and Left a Bit. And they chronicle their journey with terrific video footage. They've got a drone. And there's no bullshit about these guys. They're not trying to make themselves out to be heroes or the best or whatever. You see the mistakes they make. You see the pitfalls. They have a wonderful interaction with the local people. So as I'm not able to travel at the moment because of Corona, I really get a lot of enjoyment about following these guys, their exploits vicariously.
Okay. So we're going to kind of guide ourselves into the Bulldogs here now, but we're going to do that with one more motorcycling story. And I want to hear how you got yourself to the 2016 grand final.
Yeah, look, this is a story I've told many times, and I love telling this story to people. When I was, I have a lot of stuff on websites, and a guy contacted me on, I think it was www.rideasia.net. And on that site, it says that I live in Lombok, Indonesia. Well, I also live in Bendigo, Australia, So this guy contacted me. He thought I was in Lombok. But at the time he contacted me, I was back in Bendigo. So he contacted me and said, look, I've got long service leave coming up. I'm an auto mechanics teacher at Technical and Further Education College near Bendigo at a place called Charlton. I've got long service leave in February. I want to come, in September. I want to come over and do a motorcycle trip with you through Eastern Indonesia. I've been looking at your stuff, and I want to come and visit these places. Would you be interested in, doing this trip? Mm-hmm. So I got in touch with him and said, look, I'm not in Indonesia at the moment. I'm in Bendigo. And he said, well, I'm in Bendigo too, and here's my phone number. So I rang him. Now, when I was back in Australia, I used to do a job delivering the Saturday morning and Sunday morning newspapers using my car. The newspapers would be wrapped up in plastic, and you just throw them out the driver's side window, right? Mm-hmm. So I rang him and I said, where do you live in Bendigo? He said, I live in Golden Square. I said, oh, yeah, what street do you live in? He said, Mikado Court. I said, oh, yeah, what number? He said, number 4. I said, mate, I've been delivering, when I'm back in Australia, I've been delivering your Saturday morning newspaper for 10 years. We got on like a house on fire. This guy's a really keen motorcyclist, been a lifelong motorcyclist. We got on like a house on fire. And I said to him, look, straight away, I said, this was in April 2016, in April. And I was just about to leave for Indonesia. And I said to him, look, Daryl, we can go on this trip, right? But I'm telling you right now, if the Bulldogs make the 2016 grand final, I'll be turning around the next morning and going back to Australia for a week. And he looked at me and he said, don't worry, that's never going to happen. And of course,
now,
that were the perfect words.
Is he a Bulldog supporter?
No, he's an Essendon supporter.
Okay.
So the next day, when we set out on the trip, he arrived just after we had defeated Hawthorn in the second semi-final. So we needed to get to a place where we'd be able to watch the preliminary final. And I knew a bar on the east coast of Sumbawa, which is the next island east of Lombok, a bar called the Blue Lagoon, and there was also a restaurant there that had satellite TV coverage. And so we rode over after a couple of days, and we got to Sumbawa, to this restaurant owned by a French guy. It's a ramshackle place built up on stilts. And we watched the game against GWS, which was still, I think that it's probably the most exciting game of football I've ever seen. And I turned around the next morning and said, Daryl, I'm going back for a week. I turned around. I organised my wife, Sarah. I rang her and said, get me an airline ticket. And she got into gear and organised the ticket for me. And, I rode back from Sumbawa and I made it back to Lombok in one day. I was on the road for 14 and a half hours, not all of it riding because there's a ferry trip involved.
Okay.
We were on the ferry for about, it's an hour and a half crossing the water. And then we had to queue up to get to get off the ferry because there was a couple of boats ahead of us. And I probably did ride for about 11 hours that day, 11 or 12 hours. And I made it back about 9:30 at night. And a couple of days later, I made it back on, would have been the Sunday. And on the Wednesday, I flew out went to Melbourne, and I went to the grand final with my daughter. And I was back in Australia for a week. And it was be one of the best experiences of my life to
Fantastic.
See us win after 55 years. I mean, that's a long time to wait for something, long time. And I must be honest and say in the last few years, I'm thinking to myself, am I going to live to see the Bulldogs win a premiership? And I'm really pleased to say that we won one.
Well, and now you're at the point where you can say, are they going to get another one? And that is certainly a club that has as good a shot as anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I believe that, we're in a very good position. We've got a couple of issues that we have an issue with our ruck, and we also in the past few years we have not been treated well by the injury gods.
Well, losing Josh Bruce did not help very much last year.
Well, exactly. And I mean, that was an absolute tragedy to lose him in the last minute of a game right at the end of the season was very difficult. But, we also, during the season, we lost Dunkley and Treloar.
Right.
So everyone's up and running and fit, and we come through pretty much, relatively unscathed in comparison to the last few years. I think we've got a really good shot at it. Really good shot.
Yeah, I think this is a very solid club, and there were, quite frankly, there were not a lot of openings on this list. I mean, they only brought in Tim O'Brien coming over from Hawthorn this year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there were not that many positions that were going to be available on this list.
That's exactly right. And there's one thing I might mention. The current CEO at the Bulldogs, Amit Baines, he's a Bendigo boy from the town that I live in at the moment. He's doing a great job. Amit I taught at the school that I didn't actually teach him, but he was at the school that I was teaching at when he was doing his secondary education here in Bendigo, and he played football for South Bendigo. His dad is from the Punjab in India, and his mum is also his dad's a Sikh and his mother's a Sikh also, but she was born in Indonesia and speaks fluent Indonesian and Punjabi great family. And Amit is doing a great job as the CEO of the Bulldogs. We got him over from St Kilda, where he did a great job at St Kilda. So we're very, very lucky to have Amit Baines as our CEO.
Yeah, and you look at the list, and there are, at the end of this year, Adam, Treloar's 29, Jason Johansson's 29, Mitch Wallace 29, Josh Bruce will be 30 by the time the year's up. Tom Liberatore will be 30. Stephen Martin is the senior citizen on the side at 35.
Right.
And it's if his body holds up in the ruck, I don't see why, as much as it pains me to say it as a supporter of another club, I don't see why this side cannot be back in the grand final again this year.
There's going to
be a few good clubs there.
I believe that too. I think the fade out against Melbourne was it was like a perfect storm for Melbourne. I don't think any team was going to stop them once they got that run on.
Yeah.
And of course, the rules have changed a lot. In the old day, now with the 6-6-6 rule, it makes it very difficult to get people. You can't get people behind the ball anymore with the 6-6-6 rule. And in the old days, when a team got a run on like that, someone would start a bit of biffo to slow them down. They'd do something. There'd be a scrimmage or, but now it's like an instant free kick and a 50-metre penalty. So you sort of thing. So you basically, if you're trying to rough stuff, you're given a goal, straight away. So, but I do think, that Melbourne showed them they were the top side all year, and we gave a good account of ourselves until like the wheels fell off, and just to get to the grand final with the quarantining and the travel the team had to do, and the lack of the ability, we weren't able to train as we would have normally trained, was a superb effort, especially considering that we really shat the bed, as we say, in the last 3 weeks of the home and away series by losing against Essendon and losing against Port Adelaide and coughing up the double chance. Lesser people, they would have let that get to them. But no, Beveridge got the boys up, and we had a couple of really great finals performances, really top performances.
Right.
It's just a pity we couldn't go the last step.
Yeah, so you mentioned the ruck position this year, but is there anything else that worries you about the side? Is there anything that you're going, ooh, this is troublesome?
We've had a perennial problem with goal kicking. I think our goal kicking has been down for years, and really, we create so many opportunities. So, and we muck them up with poor kicking for goal and lack of efficiency inside 50. We get as many inside 50s, more inside 50s than the other teams in the competition, but we fail to convert. We get multiple opportunities, but we make hard work of it. And that's an area that I think we really need to brush up on. We really need to do that, because when players downfield are doing all the hard work to get the ball inside 50 and forwards miss what should be gimmies, then that's disheartening for the team. It's disheartening. We really need to kick those goals, and I'm hopeful that we're going to improve on that this year.
So who do you see on the list that could possibly move into a spot where they're going to be, seizing a spot from somebody else and taking that spot from them this year? Is this the year that, Ugle Hagen takes over?
Well, you mentioned him, and he was the one that I was thinking of when you raised this question, because I really believe that he's a super talented player, he hasn't had much of an opportunity to play much football in the last few years because of Corona.
Right.
He's only 19, and I really, really hope that he is able to establish himself in the side this year, because, as we both know, high-profile players can become victims of the media. They can become victims of journalists just wanting to write a story to keep themselves in the limelight. And if he's not able to establish himself in the team, or if he gets a couple of games and doesn't do too well, these warriors behind their keyboards will, start writing stuff about him. And we all know what happened to Tom Boyd. Tom Boyd was a young man who was subjected to enormous pressure, which basically ended up him falling out of love with the game. Very difficult for a young person to deal with this public exposure. So I really, really hope that Ugle-Hagan has a good year and is able to establish himself in the side. There's a young kid there, Arthur Jones, who's really exciting to me. He's got blistering pace, and that's one quality that you cannot develop, that absolute sensational pace that some people have. It's really a factor that marks you as being something special. That ability to break away in the first 3 or 4 meters is an astonishingly attractive trait to have. And Arthur Jones has got that. So I hope that he has a good year. I'd like to see that young defender, Buku Kamis, because I think he's got a lot of athletic ability, and he's young, and he's only had 1 game, but I would like to see him establish himself as well. So Cody Waitman also, he shows a tremendous promise and could be a very damaging small forward. There's a lot of upside, and I also think Marcus Bontempelli is moving into what could be a golden era for him. He's at the prime of his footballing career, age-wise, and he's an astonishingly good player.
Right, yeah. I don't know if he does this or not, but do you know if Cody Waitman is a surfer at all? Because he looks like he could leave the ground and head out to the beach and get on a surfboard and probably be a better surfer than he is footy player.
Yeah. I'm sure. I believe he is into surfing. I'm pretty sure I've seen some clips of him at beaches and stuff like that. He's certainly got the blonde hair.
Yes, he certainly does. Yeah. So, who are you tipping Bontempelli is the best and fairest this year for the club?
Bontempelli definitely would be up there again to win the best and fairest. You have to feel a little sorry for Jack McRae to be playing in an era where you have an exceptionally talented player alongside you, because Jack McRae has been amazingly consistent over many seasons now, and he is also a player of the highest quality, but yet to win a best and fairest. So, I think that Bontempelli, Jack McRae will definitely, feature again. And Caleb Daniel is another one who's an exceptional player. I've watched a lot of football over the years, and I don't think I've seen a Bulldogs player have the vision and the spatial awareness that Caleb Daniel has. The kicks that he's able to pull off, to pinpoint in difficult situations when he's surrounded by opponents, he can thread the eye of a needle and put the ball on a teammate's chest. He's great with both hands. He's an exceptionally gifted player, really gifted player. I love to watch him play.
Okay, since you used to deliver the newspaper, we're going to go ahead and ask this here. The season is over. The 2022 season is over. Whatever game that happens to be for the Bulldogs, what does the headline in the paper say about the Bulldogs as the season comes to a close?
As the season comes to a close, well, hopefully it's going to be a headline like this: Bulldogs triumph again, or Bulldogs overcome the odds. Hopefully it's going to be a really positive thing that we're going to win the flag. But if not, I hope that it's not a headline that says Bulldogs blow their chances. I really hope that it's not that.
Okay.
Because, if you will recall that 2016 grand final, the one moment that I really, really began to feel doubt that we were going to have defeat snatched from the jaws of victory or whatever, was when that goal from Johannesson was disallowed.
Mm-hmm.
My heart sank. I thought, oh no, not again. Some freakish decision that was taken out of our hands, and we are going to get dudded by this. And thank Christ, Jordan Roughhead marked the kick in. Because Beveridge concedes too that was a pivotal moment when they kicked in from that disallowed goal from Johannesson. Roughhead took that pack mark and put the ball back in there again. So, yeah, I just hope it's not a headline that says, Bulldogs blow their chances.
Okay. Now, I had a question that I've been wanting to ask you here, and I honestly, I don't have a clue how you're going to react to this, and because I don't know how much you have embraced this or not, but would you like to see the club re-embrace the name Footscray rather than staying with Western?
No way. No way.
Okay.
It would be an absolute retrograde step, and I'll tell you why. I grew up in the western suburbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Braybrook is in between Footscray and Sunshine. It's about from Braybrook, where I lived, into the heart of Footscray would probably be about 4 kilometres.
Okay.
Now, Footscray is a working class area, and it has changed dramatically over the years. Footscray has been really an entry point for migrants into Australia since the 1950s.
Okay.
It's played host to many, many different migrant communities. The first were Italians, Yugoslavs, Greeks, and then later on it was the Vietnamese came in to the west to Footscray and so on. Now, Footscray is a very, very popular area for young couples. It's become gentrified. It's so close to the city.
Mm-hmm.
House prices have gone through the roof. Footscray, Yarraville, Seddon, all those areas, even Sunshine now, Braybrook, have become gentrified areas. But it's also the western suburbs. If you go further west from Footscray, there is a huge, huge growth corridor between Footscray and Geelong. Hoppers Crossing, Point Cook, Werribee, Truganina, Wyndham Vale. Some of these places I don't even know the names of. There is a massive population growth.
Okay.
And the western suburbs has got to be the name that we retain, because those people belong to the West. And if they're going to identify with a football club, they're not going to identify with Footscray. Footscray is a place that they would rarely visit.
Okay.
But they identified as the western suburbs, the Western Bulldogs, and we must not change back to Footscray. We must not.
That is one heck of a great geography lesson there. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was.
Well, I went down there a few years ago, and I actually got lost. I was trying to get back to Bendigo. I mean, it is just a massive growth area, And a lot of the migrants there, a lot of the people who've moved into the area are from Indian background. We have a large Indian diaspora in Melbourne now. people, because as you know, I mean, India is the birthplace of mathematics, and India has very large numbers of people who are excellent with computers and programming and in all those areas. And we have a large Indian population now in the western suburbs, particularly health professionals in medicine, nursing, and so on, and computer and IT people working in commerce and industry. So a lot of, and one of our leading supporters, I don't know if you see, he wears an Indian headdress. Okay. A guy, I think his name's Gary. He comes from down that way, but you sometimes see him on the TV. He wears a big Indian headdress. So he's an Indian guy. I think his name's Gary. But there's a lot of, and you see frequently now. You see, Indian people of Indian background wearing Bulldogs colours. So I would not change back to Footscray at all.
Makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Are you prepared for a few Bulldogs trivia questions?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Okay. I have one. Let's see. I have 7 of them here for you.
Okay.
What Bulldog will play his 200th game in round 1 this year?
Oh, good question. 200th game in round 1. Can we go on to the next question? I'll think about that while we.
Sure. I will give you a hint on that one. We have mentioned that person's name during our conversation today.
So. The 200th game for the Bulldogs, not for another club, like not a combined.
That I don't necessarily know. Based upon where I got the information from, it's 200 games total. I can let me look here real quickly, and I can clarify that real quickly for you here. I can check that for you here, because I didn't dig that deeply into that, and I probably should have. Let's see here. Let's go to actually, most of his games were not played for the Bulldogs.
Oh, not played for the Bulldogs.
I will tell you. In fact, I will tell you. Yes, it is Stephen Martin. Yes, it is.
Martin, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, he's only played 9 games for the Bulldogs so far. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So that was not a great question on my part there. This one, I think this is a better one. Which senior coach has won the most games in Bulldogs history?
I'm pretty sure that's got to be Luke Beveridge.
It is, but only by 1 game over Ted Whitten, 92-91.
Okay.
Yeah. He overtook Ted Whitten last year.
Right.
Who led the Bulldogs in disposal average last year?
Again, I think it's Jack McRae.
That is right. Yes. See, I told you that first question was lousy. Now, which 3 players have kicked at least 500 goals for the Bulldogs?
Simon Beasley. Kelvin Templeton.
Don't have that name written down.
Simon Beasley. Okay, hang on. Simon Beasley's one. Go on to the next question. I'll come back to it.
Okay. Who led the club in the total number of tackles last year?
Good question. Well, the obvious one would be like Tom Liberatore, but I don't think it is Tom Liberatore.
Well, quit doubting yourself, because that is who it is.
It is, okay.
Yes. Well, my hint for that one, if you were struggling with that one, was that this AFL player has a tattoo artist with the worst spatial awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on the same page there. Look, I'm getting back to the goal kickers. So Simon Beasley's 1.
He's number 1. He's at 575.
Yeah.
And Templeton is at 494, so he was close.
Yeah, close. Jack Collins?
He's at
No.
385.
Yeah.
Both of these players played in the 2000s.
Goal kickers. Can you give me an initial?
Do you want a last initial or first initial?
Give me a last initial.
J and G.
J.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a first and a last initial?
No, that's a last initial for both of them. J and G.
Brad Johnson, of course.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So Simon Beasley, Brad Johnson, and G. No, I just can't think.
Chris Grant.
Oh, of course, my godfather. How could I forget that? I saw him as a 17-year-old when he kicked 54 goals in his first season. I rank him as one of my greatest Bulldogs ever.
Yeah.
I mean, he was robbed of a Brownlow medal.
Mm-hmm.
The same as George Bissett was robbed of a Brownlow medal.
I did not know that.
Georgie Bissett, in the last game of the year against Carlton, he kicked 6 goals, but he got reported. Everyone said he was best on ground.
Wow.
Absolute best on ground. Got 6 goals, but got reported.
That's awful.
He was found not guilty. But because he got reported, the umpires didn't give him any votes.
Wow.
And it cost him the Brownlow medal.
They can't go back and do that retroactively then.
No. Although, it was a complete injustice. Georgie Bissett played for Braybrook Football Club and grew up in our area and is still going strong. Braybrook had some great footballers. George Bissett, Ted Whitten, Wally Donald played 200 games for the Bulldogs. Dougie Hawkins, of course. Brian Wilson, who won a Brownlow medal. Gary Merrington played 169 games for the Bulldogs. Dennis Collins played over 100 games for the Bulldogs before he went to Richmond and Carlton. There's been some marvellous, marvellous players come out of the Braybrook Football Club. There's no doubt about it. Absolute, fabulous football club.
I did not know that Chris Grant had also been robbed of a Brownlow.
Right. The circumstances were this. Chris Grant in a game against Carlton, this was in a year where Carlton had been offering him huge money to go and transfer over from the Bulldogs to Carlton, and he resisted these temptations. In a game against Carlton, he got reported by the umpires it was like a stomach punch or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And he played a very, very good game and was reported by the umpires and became, and he got off. He was found not guilty. Now, Ian Collins, who was head of the AFL, well, I don't know what his position was in the AFL. He wasn't the president of the AFL, but he had some executive position there at the AFL. He had the power to open up an inquiry into the incident. And as a result of that inquiry into the incident, I think the decision was overturned and Grant was found guilty, and it cost him a Brownlow medal.
Wow.
Ian Collins was apparently very dirty on Chris Grant for not accepting Carlton's offer. This is how people feel it played out. And Ian Collins got back at Chris Grant by doing this. That's the story that people believe.
Wow.
Whether or not it's true or not, I don't know. But certainly there was bad blood between the two clubs over that. And Chris Grant was just a marvellous, marvellous footballer. With great privilege to watch him play because he was a guy who could do anything on the football field. Mm-hmm. And being a gun player, he was often subjected to scragging and people hanging on, and he didn't really ever get the free kicks that he should have got from the umpires. But, boy, what a gun. He could play centre-half forward, centre-half back. He was an outstanding footballer and still holds the record for most number of goals kicked by a 17-year-old. He kicked 54 goals as a 17-year-old. So
wow, that's
yeah,
amazing.
great player.
That's an impressive mark right there for such a young
Uh,
age.
yeah, he played for Dalesford Football Club, which is not far from where I live.
Okay.
It's only about half an hour's ride on the motorbike. My motorbike that I ride at the moment, Craig, it stayed in my shed for 31 years. I've got a CB750 Honda, and it conked out on me coming back from Melbourne back in about 1991. And it got put in the shed, and I never. I mean, life took over, and I was busy with a whole lot of other things, building a house and stuff, and raising two daughters, and the bike got put under cover, and it was only about 18 months ago I decided, well, look, I've got plenty of time on my hands. I won't be going back to Indonesia. Let's get this bike going. And, I took it apart and redid the engine. I bought it out to 836cc. It used to be 812. Bought it out to 836. A good mate of mine spray painted the bike. It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And, I just really love riding this motorbike. I took it out yesterday and had to go to a couple of places, and I had 7 people ask me about the motorbike because, it's 50 years old now.
Wow.
And it looks fantastic, but it sounds even better. It's got nothing. It's got nothing in the pipes, and it's a 4-into-2 system. And the mufflers, well, they're more spark arresters than anything else. They're made out of brass. A mate of mine turned them up out of brass. It's polished brass. They're very unique. It's a unique motorcycle, and people see it and they say, "What is that?" And people stop me and talk about this motorbike all the time, and they just want to hear it start. They just want me to start it up, and when I start it up, wow, they jump.
Wow, it is. I've not driven a motorcycle. I mean, I've been on several, but I've never had a motorcycle. It's not. I guess I never quite caught that bug. For that sort of thing, but with the way gas prices are right now, I'm thinking that I might be time to consider one.
I ride mine all the time now, and my old man had the motorcycling bug. I think I told you his brother Jimmy was in show business and had plenty of money, and his brother Jimmy had bought the first overhead valve Norton in Newcastle when the Norton released an overhead valve model in the 1930s, and Jimmy and my old man used to go up to Scotland on the motorbike, and they'd speed through these villages. And whenever they went through a village, me Uncle Jimmy used to say to the old man, "Put your hand over the number plate, young'un."
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are you ready for the last 2 questions?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Who have the Bulldogs defeated the most times in their history? And it's 2 different clubs that have the same number of victories against them.
Okay. I think it would be St Kilda, and maybe. Oh, we've got modern clubs as well, haven't we?
Well, I will tell you
the most. Yeah,
I will tell you neither of these are terribly modern.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Look, I'll go for St Kilda and North Melbourne.
North Melbourne is one of them. The other one is the Swans.
Oh, South Melbourne. Swans,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Swans. Yep.
The Bulldogs have beaten both of them 83 times and lost to them 79 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's touch and go. I know. I got a feeling the club that we've been defeated by the most is Geelong.
Well, I can certainly hope so, right? Am I allowed to say that?
Sure.
Let's see here if I can find that here real quickly. The most losses? No. Well, they're second to Collingwood. 110 losses to Collingwood.
Okay, sure.
Wow.
Well, look, I know that Ted Whitten played for 20 seasons for the Bulldogs. He never played in a winning game at Geelong. And Doug Hawkins played 329 games for us and never played in a winning game at Geelong.
Well, that means
it was a hoodoo ground for us, an absolute hoodoo ground.
Yeah, the record against Collingwood is not great. 48 wins and 110 losses.
Yeah, I know. But I was at the Western Oval the day Simon Beasley kicked the goal after the siren to win the game for us against Collingwood, which was. Have you ever seen a clip of that?
I don't think so.
It's one of the biggest brain fades by any defender ever. Gubby Allen for Collingwood got the ball in the back pocket from, I think, a free kick. Or it could have been a mark, but he certainly, it was in a situation where play had stopped. He took his kick, he kicked the ball across ground to Greg Phillips, who was the Collingwood fullback, who was standing about 45 metres out from the Collingwood goal. He kicked the ball across ground, and Beasley anticipated and ran in and intercepted the mark and took the mark just before Phillips could get to the ball. Wow. And he went back and he slotted the goal. It was at the Barclay Street end. The ball went back to the centre for a bounce, and as soon as the ball was bounced, the siren went. So there would have been 2 seconds on the clock when Beasley took that mark, and that cost Collingwood the game. Very famous game. I was there.
All right. Your last question. Which player led the Bulldogs in time on ground percentage in 2021? And he played in 19 of the 26 games.
Time on ground percentage. I'll go for Caleb Daniel.
Not Caleb Daniel. He was, let me go back here real quickly to my list. He was a little further down the list. And it's actually a name that I'm not that familiar with, which is, I was very surprised by that. It is.
Give me the initials.
Well, if I give you the first initial, it's going to be, the last initial is a C.
Zane Cordy?
Yeah.
Zane Cordy, eh?
That's not a name that I hear, when I watch Bulldogs games, that's not a name that I hear a whole heck of a lot.
Well, look, he's become a bit of a whipping boy, which I think is a bit unfair. People, like, in 2016, he played primarily as a forward and kicked some crucial goals. It was his first season in our finals campaign. Since then, he's been used as a backman and and occasionally in the ruck. His father and his brother were great players for the Bulldogs. I knew Neil Cordy, his uncle, quite well because he taught at Essendon Tech when I was teaching. Neil's a great guy. Played for the Bulldogs about 125 games, then went up to Sydney and played for the Swans. Really good player. And Zane's father, Brian, was a very good defender for the Bulldogs, played about 140 games.
Okay.
Look, he's become a bit of a whipping boy, and I think quite unfairly. He is a pretty dour defensive player. People criticise him because they say he gets beaten in one-on-ones. But, I'm a bit of a fan. I think he's a really hard-tackling, hard-working player. And he uses the ball pretty well.
Okay.
Not spectacular, but he does his job for sure.
All right. So and again, that's just not a name for some reason that my memory is remembering hearing all that often. And maybe I have, and it just didn't register with me. But
hey, listen, I know we're going to close up pretty soon. Let me tell you what I think is the greatest individual effort I've ever seen on a football field. And it came in the 2016 grand final.
Okay.
And it happened in the last quarter. And people call it the Wall of Biggs. When Shane Biggs held the ball in to our forward half with about 5 or 6 individual efforts spread over a 45-second passage of play. Mm-hmm. He was involved in he was the guy that I think the Swans player, I forget who it was now, he charged down the guy's kick. He either got a free kick or took a mark and kicked, and Shane Biggs charged the ball down, kept the ball down, tackled. He tackled 3 or 4 times. He smothered. He was just sensational. And if you haven't seen that film clip, it's 45 seconds of absolute mayhem, which results in Liam Picken kicking a goal. And it was all down to Shane Biggs. Just a tremendous effort, you know. And mm-hmm. He said, I've heard him interviewed about it, and he said, well, I had to do that because I'm a half backline player, and I was way out of position. If they got the ball out of our forward half, I knew we were going to be outnumbered down back. Yeah, it's a tremendous, tremendous piece of play. People call it the Wall of Biggs.
Okay.
Very exciting.
I will find that. I will find that clip and take a peek at that. But yeah, that's not one because I mean I've seen highlights of the grand final, and I may have run across it during that, but you know that until I got the Watch AFL app here, you know, the few games that they were showing each year, they would never show the grand final on television here in the US because they wanted people to pay to watch it somewhere along the line. But you know, now with the Watch AFL app is a great tool for us to be able to watch everything.
Listen, are you familiar with a YouTube channel called Al's Highlights?
Al's Highlights.
Al's Highlights. He's a Bulldog supporter, and he does tremendous work putting together highlights of Bulldogs games. And he does, for example, he does what is called octo calls. Like, for example, Bontempelli's goal against GWS in the preliminary final in 2016, he's got an octo call of that. So you see the same play 8 times, but they're recorded from different
cameras,
different radio stations, different
I see.
TV stations. It's the same play with maybe 3 or 4 different TV commentaries and 3 or 4 different radio commentaries. So Al's Highlights are really good.
I'll check that out. That's not one I'm familiar with.
YouTube Al's Highlights. Okay. Really good stuff.
I will look for that one. Well, Steven, this has been an absolute pleasure. This is, you know, I was extraordinarily excited for the chance to talk with you and the stories you've told, and you know, even some of the stuff that we talked about off air. Just absolutely fascinating that you've been able to travel the way that you have, and hopefully, once all of the restrictions come down, you can get on your bike and head wherever the heck you want.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Hey, and look, I've really enjoyed talking to you. You're a great listener and great questions. I felt very comfortable doing this podcast, and I'm really, really pleased to have got on board, Craig. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
You bet, yeah. And if Ray is interested, by all means,
I'll contact him this afternoon.
Have him reach out to me then. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank my guest, Steven Campbell, for joining me this morning or this afternoon now to share some of these fascinating journeys and stories with us. And I'm still just trying to wrap my head around the fact that, you know, just Ted Whitten shows up after driver's training. But Steven, thanks so very much, sir. This was an absolute joy. I truly enjoyed this.
I did too as well, Craig. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and all the best, buddy.
You bet. You bet.
Go Bulldogs.
And a big thank you to Steven Campbell for absolutely being so generous with his time and generous with his home. Once you've heard this story, you're gonna be impressed with this gentleman. This was an absolute treat to talk with him. Don't forget that you can reach me over at my website, yankonthefooty.com. You can also reach me by email at yankonthefooty@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at yank_on, and on Facebook and Instagram, just look for a Yank on the Footy. And remember, if you get on that mailing list, as soon as a new episode comes out, it will be in your inbox. That's the quickest way to get it to you fresh out of the oven. just like I'm going to be doing with this one here in just a few moments. And folks, I want to thank you for listening. This is actually the 17th preview episode that I've been able to do for this year. I have one other one that I was hoping to do, and I do still hope to do it, but it may come after the season has begun. I am still looking for a Richmond supporter to sit down and talk with, so if you happen to be a Richmond supporter, please consider reaching out. Shoot me an email at yankonthefooty@gmail.com, or head over to my website and fill out the register as a guest form. That would be a huge help. You can also leave me a note on Messenger, or you can leave me a DM as well on Twitter. I do check those quite frequently. Folks, I cannot thank you enough for listening, because without you, I'm not doing this podcast, and I truly, truly thank you for the kind words that you have shared with me over the last couple of years, and the encouragement over these last few weeks as I've been doing these preview episodes has been overwhelming. It means the world to me, and I'm having a blast. I've learned so much. I've had the chance to talk with so many people that I otherwise would have likely never spoken with, and you can't trade that for anything. We're just a few hours away from the first bounce. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I'll catch you later. This has been episode 149 of A Yank on the Footy. Don't forget that you can reach me at yank_on or to yankonthefooty@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at A Yank on the Footy. And check out the website at yankonthefooty.com. And I do hope you'll consider signing up for that mailing list. And please share this episode with your footy friends. And if you have a relative who's been a fan for many, many, many years, I think they're going to enjoy my discussion here that I had with Mr. Campbell. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Craig Wessels. Goodbye.